Preliminary information is that a male student asked to be excused from his class. He left the classroom. He then returned armed with 2 handguns.
But the school shooting horror now hitting home in Noblesville.
I got a call from my daughter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. How easy was it for you to be reunited?
And then on the loudspeaker, they came out and said there was an active shooter, just take shelter. So we went into this storage area. There were a lot of kids just calling their parents and friends, just making sure they're all right. And I was just there in the dark.
I was in class and they came over the intercom. They said that shots were fired in the 7th grade hallway. And so we went under my teacher's desk, and then one of my teachers came out and told us to run, so we ran.
Students evacuated the middle school and took buses to the high school, where another alert sounded when somebody sent in a threat there.
Just want to get my arms around my boy. I mean, he's so shooken up. I got a "Mom, I'm scared" text message, and other than that, it was "come get me at the high school."
Selfishly, I have relief that my nephew is physically okay, but there are going to be so many scars from this that I can't even imagine.
May 26 marks the anniversary of a shooting inside Noblesville West Middle School. It was 2018 that a student there went in and opened fire, shooting a classmate, Ella Whistler, and also teacher Jason Seaman, before Seaman wrestled the shooter to the ground. Now, Seaman hasn't spoken publicly about the violence in his classroom for several years now, but he did sit down with 13 News to reflect on his experience.
Because in my mind, it's the same story, just different characters, and not a lot is changing.
When 7th grade science teacher Jason Seaman heard about the tragedy in Texas, he felt profound sadness, but he wasn't surprised.
Not really surprising. Unfortunately, it's a here we go again.
The deadly gun violence nearly 4 years to the day after he was shot in his own school. Seaman spent this anniversary in the same Noblesville West classroom where it happened, still doing what he loves.
Same room, same everything. The 25th to me is a day, and I'm not going to let it be something that brings negative emotion.
When one of his 13-year-old students shot Seaman and classmate Ella Whistler in 2018, he disarmed the young gunman and everyone survived. He says the school, thanks to security improvements, is safer than ever.
We had a great outcome, all things considered, so that definitely factors into how much I think about it. If I were in the situation that happened in Texas where lives were lost, it would be a much different anniversary.
And that's why Seaman is concerned. School shootings are still happening with mind-numbing frequency.
It hurts because people are losing loved ones, and then it also hurts that it's going to keep happening because what needs to change is not being addressed. What really frustrates me is that that seems to be the trigger for people to fight and point fingers on various platforms, but then not a lot is changing in a progressive way in our legislation and the people who can actually impact the change.
What should change?
I am a fan of the background checks. I think we need to do that. That's a start. But just overall, how we approach the subject can't be a this or that. There's got to be a compromise, and we need to figure out what works. It's a puzzle, so you have to take the human element, and you have to have the firearm element, and you have to have the mental health element, and that takes people in the know, specialists from each one coming together to make a compromise and not be entrenched in, well, this is what I think, this is what has to happen.
Ready? Hi, Ella.
Nearly 2 months have gone by since the horrific school shooting in Noblesville. You might think school would be the last place 13-year-old Ella Whistler would want to be. But as we learned from Jim, Deb, and Kevin on WFMS Radio this morning, it's not necessarily the case.
Ella has been fighting through her recovery and working very hard. She's going to be returning to school on the 1st of August.
And she's ready, she said.
Yeah, she is.
I am really ready. People just don't believe that I'm going back the first day. Some people think I'm going to be homeschooled. Some people think I won't be there the first day. But it's going to be as normal as possible.
As normal as it can be for a girl who was shot 7 times. We've seen her in 2 parades, in Carmel and in her hometown of Noblesville.
It was funny seeing people's reactions. They're just like, oh my gosh, it's Ella.
But this was her radio debut.
Ella's with us here, of course, the inspiration of Ella's Aid, joining us here, being our guest all throughout this morning. We're glad to have you here. I want to do a shout out, I believe, to Jason?
Yes.
Jason Seaman, who's your teacher?
Your teacher.
Hello, Jason.
He's listening.
I can call him Jason now.
Jason Seaman is the teacher who was also shot that day while grappling with the shooter trying to prevent further bloodshed. She admitted to Jim, Deb, and Kevin that while she likes Jason as a teacher, she's not particularly fond of his class.
I didn't like the subject. I did not like it at all. But he made it fun, so I mean, it made it better, but I just didn't like the subject.
Megan Schleter says she was just 7 months into her new job as school nurse at Noblesville West the day of the shooting.
It was around 9 o'clock and I got a phone call from one of the science teachers, and she was whispering and she said, this is not a joke. I just heard shots fired across the hall. I had children in my clinic at the time who I needed to keep safe, so I barricaded them in my room, called 911, and then ran to the scene of the incident on May 25th.
Schleter says she didn't hesitate.
I have 2 children in that building at the time, and I didn't know if I was running to help my own children, to help my best friend's children, to help children I didn't know, and it didn't matter. And I am the only medically trained person in that building, and I knew I could not stay in my office, that I had to run to the scene.
Her background is emergency room nursing. She was familiar with Ella Whistler, the student shot, from show choir. And when she arrived in the classroom, Schleter says she was unaware that the student who fired his gun had also hit teacher Jason Seaman. For her heroic efforts, Riverview Health awarded Schleter the Daisy Award. Ella Whistler surprised her at the ceremony.
I don't know if I would be standing here today if it weren't for all the first responders, especially Megan. And I would like to thank her from the bottom of my heart for that.
She and I are very close, and I really feel like we always will be. We're going to share something that not too many people share. And I think that bond will just be there forever. But I feel like we have all grown stronger and closer, and we're all kind of ready to move forward because Ella survived and Jason Seaman survived. And we're very fortunate that we do have survivors from this tragedy.
Now, the shooter, who was 13 years old at the time of the incident, was ordered to a juvenile prison until his 18th birthday. That's this year. But it was back on April 19th that prosecutors in the case asked the judge to keep that shooter locked up while they investigated an alleged incident that occurred inside that juvenile facility. 13 News learned that incident involved him making a fist bump motion to a female caseworker. But instead, the shooter allegedly touched her breast with his hands. The judge says this incident shows the shooter is not ready to be released from custody. He now will undergo a psychological evaluation before another review hearing.
Again, we've been talking about this for 4 years, and these shootings just continue to happen.
Parents in the group Noblesville Stands Together are now standing with the parents of students from Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas.
It's devastating to watch these families have to go through another senseless, tragic shooting, in just what is a string of long, senseless, tragic shootings.
The feeling of fear and devastation the community in Texas is going through is something Steve Rogers knows about. His son was a student at Noblesville West Middle School when a 13-year-old gunman opened fire, shot a student and a teacher in a classroom.
That is the thing that I remember most about that day, is having to wait several hours. I wanted my son back in my arms right now.
He says there are people in Noblesville who will never get over that day.
There are kids today in Noblesville who still startle every time they hear the door of their classroom jiggle.
Local law enforcement is also feeling the heaviness from this tragedy. That's why they tell me right now is the time for all schools to reinforce their security.
The Indiana Sheriff's Association, we are seriously looking at enhancing threat assessment behavioral teams, even digital threat assessment teams, because a lot of time the behaviors can be picked up early.
The group has worked with Noblesville schools to increase safety in classrooms. For example, better building security, access to mental health services, and advocating for responsible gun ownership and reform. But the shooting in Texas is evidence there's more work to be done nationwide.
We are the only civilized country in the world that has this problem.
After the shooting in 2018, the district asked for and the community passed a referendum to make enhancements to mental health and safety programs. That included $1.7 million allocated for staffing, facilities, and procedures, and another $1.5 million for mental health resources and initiatives.
Well, keep in mind today's rally comes just a few days after another mass shooting, this one at Michigan State University, where 3 students were killed and 5 others injured. With that top of mind, there are a few bills in the House and Senate that these gun safety advocates say, many of them parents, that they will be asking lawmakers to push forward. These mothers say they're watching several bills in both the House and Senate this session that deal with guns. One of them, House Bill 1471, would require a gun owner to keep the gun locked and unloaded, with the gun and ammunition stored in separate places. Another bill, Senate Bill 358, calls for similar measures and would also require a gun owner to report within 24 hours a gun that turns up stolen or missing. Gun safety advocates also expressed concern for House Bill 1614, which would repeal an Indiana law that temporarily limits access to guns for a person if a court decides the person is a danger to himself or others. Tricia Owens is part of Moms Demand Action. Her kids were in grade school in Noblesville when a school shooting happened there at the middle school.
I started getting pinged with the schools are on lockdown, shooting, emails, texts. I mean, it was unreal. And I know that people think that it won't happen to them. And luckily my kids were safe, but it's just, unfortunately, it's a matter of time. And I don't want that to ever happen to anyone again.
And there is a bill that just passed out of the House and is headed to the Senate that would offer voluntary handgun training to teachers.